My brother stood before dessert arrived, glass raised, voice bright with confidence that didn't belong to him alone. "The business is mine," he said, smiling like the words had been rehearsed for weeks. "Grandma and Dad decided it's best this way." Applause rippled around the table, quick, eager, relieved. Chairs scraped. Someone laughed. My aunt nodded as if this outcome had always been obvious. I felt the sound before I felt the pain, like thunder before rain. My hands stayed folded in my lap, fingers gently pressed together to keep them from trembling. For a moment, I couldn't hear anything else. The dining room smelled of rosemary and warm bread. Candles flickered against the glass cabinet where Grandma kept old photographs, black and white faces staring out from another time. I had polished that cabinet earlier in the afternoon, the way I always did when we gathered. It was my quiet contribution, my way of saying I belonged. No one looked at me. I had grown up believing the business was something we would talk about together. Not because I wanted control, but because I wanted honesty. I had worked there since I was 19, late nights balancing books, weekends handling suppliers, mornings opening the shop before sunrise. When Dad said, "We'll figure it out," I believed him. When Grandma squeezed my hand and said, "There's time," I trusted that too. Apparently, time had been used without me. My brother continued talking, about vision, expansion, how hard he'd worked. Some of it was true. Some of it wasn't. But truth was flexible tonight. It bent easily to applause. I smiled because it was expected of me. Because women in my family were taught early how to make disappointment look graceful. I smiled because anger would only make me invisible in a louder way. Then I heard myself speak. "Grandma," I said softly, lifting my glass just enough for it to catch the candlelight. "Should I show them now?" The room went quiet so suddenly it felt unreal. As if someone had closed a door on the noise. Forks paused midair. My brother's smile froze, then shifted into something uncertain. Dad's eyes lifted from his plate, confusion flickering across his face. "Show us what?" someone asked, too quickly. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I turned my gaze to Grandma. She sat at the head of the table, smaller than she used to be, her hands folded neatly over a linen napkin. Her eyes met mine, and in them I saw something I hadn't expected: recognition. Not surprise. Not anger. Recognition. As if she had been waiting for this moment but hadn't known when it would arrive. She didn't speak either. The silence stretched, uncomfortable now. My brother cleared his throat and laughed lightly. "She's always joking," he said. "You know how she is." I nodded once, still smiling. Inside, something fragile cracked, not loudly, not all at once. It cracked the way old trust does, quietly, after too much weight has been placed on it for too long. I remembered the emails I'd never been copied on. The meetings moved without notice. The way Dad stopped asking my opinion months ago. The documents I'd found by accident, folded carefully into a drawer I was never meant to open. I remembered telling myself there must be a reasonable explanation. Tonight told me there wasn't. Grandma finally placed her napkin on the table. "Dinner is getting cold," she said gently. "Let's eat." The conversation restarted, slower this time. "Careful." My brother avoided my eyes. Dad said nothing at all. I took a bite of food I couldn't taste and felt something unexpected settle in my chest, not rage, not grief. Clarity. I realized then that whatever had been decided without me had also been decided about me. And that hurt more than the business ever could. But I stayed quiet. Because sometimes silence is not surrender. Sometimes, it's the beginning of seeing everything clearly. The days after that dinner were quieter than I expected. The house felt different, even though everything looked the same: Grandma's china in its cabinet, Dad's tie collection hung neatly, the faint scent of lemon polish that always lingered after I cleaned. But I noticed things I hadn't before, small truths hidden in plain sight. My brother walked with an easy confidence now, like the business belonged to him by right. But in the evenings, when no one was watching, I saw the cracks. The way he rubbed his temples late at night, glancing at spreadsheets with a sharp edge of worry, how he lingered in the office alone, muttering under his breath. He had applause on the surface, but it didn't reach him inside. I spent my afternoons quietly observing. Not out of revenge, not out of bitterness, but to understand. I watched Dad walk past the old family ledger, pausing for just a moment, his face unreadable. I caught the way he cleared his throat whenever the topic of succession came up, avoiding eye contact with both of us. Even Grandma, whose wisdom I had trusted without question, seemed burdened. Her hands shook slightly when she poured tea, and she avoided my brother's gaze as though some unspoken weight lay between them. I realized that betrayal isn't always loud. It's not the toast, the announcement, or the applause. It's the subtle erosion of truth. The whispered decisions behind closed doors. The way someone you love looks at you like you're less important than you believed. And I felt it, like a quiet hollow inside me. I spent that week working late at the office, alone, reviewing contracts, numbers, correspondence that had been passed over. I found inconsistencies, decisions made without my knowledge, deals that had quietly excluded me, promises that had been redirected. The anger I thought I would feel never fully came. Instead, there was clarity. I understood what had happened, why it had happened, and how it had been allowed to continue unnoticed. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I stayed behind in the office while everyone else left. The room smelled faintly of paper and polished wood. I watched the shadows stretch across the floor, and for the first time I understood the pattern of it all, the way loyalty had been demanded, the way my silence had been assumed, the way my contribution had been minimized. And then I noticed the moments of quiet kindness, too. A note from Grandma tucked under my paperwork: "You see more than you realize. Keep your heart open." A brief smile from Dad, lingering longer than polite, when he passed by. Even my brother, in his frantic late-night work, showed traces of dedication, perhaps guilt or perhaps fear. It was confusing. People are not purely good or bad, I realized. Betrayal can live alongside love, and greed can coexist with remorse. The lesson wasn't simple, but it was clear: I needed to watch, to wait, and to understand, not act impulsively. I began to write again, something I hadn't done since college. Notes on the events, observations, patterns. Pages filled with questions, some answered, some lingering. I wasn't journaling for anyone but myself. I wasn't plotting a comeback or a confrontation. I was documenting the truth, quietly, without fanfare. And slowly, a strange feeling took root: patience. Because in observing, I realized that people reveal themselves in ways that can't be faked for long. My brother's triumph would always carry its own tension. Dad's avoidance would eventually speak louder than words. Grandma's quiet wisdom would guide the family, if only they noticed. I stopped wishing for immediate justice. I stopped hoping to prove myself at their table. Instead, I watched. I listened. I noticed what mattered. And in that quiet attention, I began to feel something stronger than resentment: preparedness. Prepared not to confront, not to yell, not to argue, but to act with calm, with clarity, and with dignity when the right moment came. Because sometimes the strongest power isn't what you shout, it's what you quietly hold within. By the end of that week, I realized that the room at dinner might have applauded my brother, but they hadn't truly seen me, not yet. And one day, they would. Weeks passed, but I didn't return to the table in anger. I didn't storm into the office demanding recognition or validation. Instead, I learned to sit quietly with my feelings, letting them settle like sediment in a glass of water. Anger is loud, clarity is quiet. And clarity had begun to grow within me. At first, it was difficult. Every time I saw my brother, every time I overheard Dad discussing the business with him, a sting would rise in my chest. Old habits of resentment threatened to surface. But I forced myself to pause, to notice, to listen, to observe, not react. I started noticing more than mistakes or betrayals. I noticed intentions, patterns, small truths that had gone unseen. I saw Dad linger in my office once, glancing at a file I hadn't been copied on, then leaving without a word. I realized he had always believed I didn't notice, that I didn't understand. But I did. And I began to see how much my silence had preserved my dignity. If I acted on impulse, I would have traded dignity for a moment of satisfaction. Waiting, I realized, taught a deeper kind of strength. Grandma became my quiet guide during this period. She didn't lecture or offer solutions. She simply shared small truths over tea, tucked into the ordinary rhythms of our days. Some battles are won by doing nothing, she would say softly. Observe. Wait. Let people show who they really are. Time exposes everything. Her words weren't dramatic, but they sank in. I understood them as a map, a quiet compass for navigating the subtle chaos of my family. I began to see my brother differently, not as the enemy, not as the thief of my inheritance, but as someone trapped in his own illusions of power. His confidence was a fragile mask. Behind it, I noticed hesitation, insecurity, even guilt. He had been applauded, elevated, given what he wanted, and yet, the applause hadn't freed him from the weight of his choices. Meanwhile, I grew stronger in my own way. I focused on the parts of the business that truly mattered, the work I had loved long before anyone claimed ownership. I spent my mornings reviewing accounts, my afternoons meeting clients, my evenings planning quietly for the future. I found joy in competence, pride in preparation, and, slowly, a sense of calm that had nothing to do with recognition or applause. One evening, as the sun dipped low and cast long shadows across the office, I found myself reflecting on the past months. I had felt hurt, betrayed, invisible. I had wanted acknowledgement, a clear sign that my efforts mattered. But in the silence, in the patient observation, I had discovered something far more important: self-respect. I didn't need the table to recognize my value. I had found it within myself. I also began to notice the subtle ways my family reacted when I didn't react. My brother's attempts to dominate conversations slowed, replaced by a quiet uncertainty. Dad began including me in small decisions again, carefully, testing boundaries. Even the employees, who had once whispered about my supposed exclusion, now approached me with a new respect, sensing that something in me had changed. It was never loud. There was no confrontation, no drama, no spectacle. The power in this transformation was quiet, almost invisible, but undeniable. My presence, steady and calm, began to shift the dynamic around me. By the time the next family gathering approached, I realized I had changed. I was no longer the trusting, gentle girl who would be quietly pushed aside. I had become someone who understood the value of patience, the strength in observation, and the quiet authority of dignity. And I knew, deep down, that the truth I had witnessed, the betrayal, the greed, the partiality, would reveal itself in its own way, in its own time. I didn't need to force it. I only needed to remain steady, present, and true to myself. Waiting had taught me more than anger ever could. It had taught me wisdom. And wisdom, I realized, was the quietest, most powerful revenge of all. The next family gathering arrived on a crisp autumn evening, the kind where sunlight filters through the leaves and spills gold across the floor. The house smelled faintly of apple pie and roasted vegetables, familiar and comforting, yet the air carried a tension I could almost feel. My brother entered first, confident as always, but I noticed the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Confidence, I realized, is fragile when it's not earned. Dinner started as usual, polite conversation interspersed with laughter. My brother spoke of the business, subtle boasts tucked into casual sentences. I listened, quietly, observing the room. Dad, unusually reserved, offered short, careful responses. Grandma's eyes flicked to me occasionally, small nods of acknowledgement that I returned with calm composure. When dessert was served, I didn't raise a glass, didn't announce some grand revelation. Instead, I simply smiled, sat back, and let the moment unfold around me. I had learned that the power of truth is not in theatrics but in quiet consistency. After the meal, as everyone lingered over coffee, my brother leaned closer, voice low. You're handling some of the new client accounts now, right? I didn't expect that. I smiled softly. Yes, I said, I've been handling them carefully. The clients seem happy. My voice was calm, steady, devoid of pride or arrogance. Just simple truth. He didn't respond. Instead, he looked away, eyes flicking to Dad, who merely cleared his throat and returned to his cup of tea. I realized then that the quiet strength I had cultivated, the patience, the observation, the refusal to react impulsively, was already shifting the room. It didn't feel like revenge, and yet the shift was undeniable. Later that evening, I walked through the living room with Grandma, our hands brushing briefly as she nodded toward the family gathered. They notice more than they let on, she said softly. You've grown, and that growth speaks louder than any words you could have shouted tonight. I nodded, understanding the full weight of what she meant. The lesson was not about proving my worth or claiming what was denied to me. The lesson was about boundaries, about knowing my own value, about holding dignity even when others failed to respect it. I had seen betrayal, I had felt pain, but I had also discovered something infinitely stronger, inner peace. As the evening wound down, I found my brother standing by the doorway, hesitating. I didn't approach him, and he didn't approach me. There was no need for confrontation. The tension, the uncertainty, and the subtle discomfort were enough. Actions, or in this case the calm choice not to act dramatically, had consequences all their own. I walked outside for a moment, letting the cool night air brush against my face. The moon hung low, casting silver light across the garden. I felt a sense of quiet triumph, not because I had humiliated anyone, not because I had claimed what was taken, but because I had remained true to myself. I had kept my integrity intact. I had not allowed anger or resentment to dictate my choices. And in that choice, I had won far more than any business or inheritance could offer. When I returned, the family was still gathered in soft conversation. I offered smiles and polite words, nothing forced, nothing dramatic. My brother avoided eye contact again, Dad looked reflective, and Grandma, quietly proud, caught my gaze. No one needed to speak of the past. The room carried its own understanding. That night, I went to bed with a calmness I hadn't known I was capable of. Life had tested me, revealed hidden betrayals, and challenged my patience. But it had also taught me the value of observing, waiting, and acting with dignity. I realized that some victories are quiet, almost invisible, yet they last far longer than applause. The lesson I carried forward was simple, yet profound: respect yourself, honor your boundaries, and allow time to reveal truth. Others may make choices that hurt, betray, or exclude you, but your own integrity, steady, patient, and calm, is a power no one can take. I had been underestimated, overlooked, and dismissed. But in the silence, in the quiet strength I had nurtured, I had found something no one could ever take from me, myself. And that, I realized, was enough.